Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Andrew Missick. Welcome to this episode of Voice the Word. I want to talk about some different subjects in this video. I'm going to talk about the Church of the East, the modern Assyrian people. We have this magazine. This is the Nineveh, which is put out by the American Assyrian Aramaic speaking community. And I also want to talk about Islam and the Assyrians.
Jesus was an Aramaic-speaking Jew of the Middle East, and the Assyrians are Aramaic-speaking Christians in the Middle East who have endured persecution for over 1,000 years. Join Voice of the Word Aramaic Bible teacher, artist, and author Stephen Missick as he examines the Bible through the ancient languages, peoples, lands, cultures, and times in which it was first revealed. Research the Scriptures, rescue persecuted Christians, and restore the Church to its Semitic roots. And now, Voice of the Word.
I also want to mention a website of Stephen Ulrich if you want to look at translations of the Bible in Aramaic, from the Aramaic into English. There's these three main translations: John Wesley Etheridge, James Murdoch, and then George Lamza. So we have an excellent website, Aramaic Bible Study Tools by Steve Ulrich, which you can see here. The website is Aramaic Bible Tools, where you have the parallel Aramaic Bible, parallel Aramaic New Testament, so you can see these translations from the Aramaic version of the Bible into English. I'm trying to do one episode per week, but some things came up where I want to put some more information out there. So this episode is a part of a series I'm calling An Introduction to Aramaic Studies. Now, we'll look at some language learning tools, but what I want to look at is not just the language itself, but the culture and history of Aramaic-speaking Christians. And what I want to touch on today, as I mentioned, we have this magazine. I've been subscribing to this for, 20 years. This is the Nineveh magazine, which is put out by the Assyrian Foundation of America. Now, Dr. Liz Huber is a friend of mine, and she writes articles often for this publication, Dr. Elizabeth McKaylee Huber. So she's a good woman, she's a good scholar, and I want to recommend an interview that she did so you can check out and look at her work. So Aramaic is not an extinct language yet, it's still a living language, and we need to keep the Assyrian community together and vibrant and help it create a new future. Part of that is going to mean that we need to maintain a presence of Assyrian Christians in the Middle East, in their ancient ancestral homeland. But the Assyrian people also need to share their cultural heritage because it's a very obscure people. People don't know who the Assyrians are. Now we have some notable Assyrians recently with Patrick David and Sam Shamoon. So there are people creating awareness of this ancient culture and civilization, ancient Christian culture and civilization. But they also need to have bigger families because that's the future, right? When you have families, you have a future. If you don't have big families, you could just die out. But one of the things they need to do is share their culture because it's an important part of the ancient Christian heritage, and people need to know about it. And I want to appreciate Liz for allowing me to do an article in this month's edition of Nineveh. And this is about my book on the lives of the 12 apostles, which is right here. The further acts of the apostles according to Abdias of Babylon, disciple of Jesus Christ. And Abdias of Babylon was it's still seen to a certain degree as the official edition of the lives of the 12 apostles. And it's attributed to a disciple of Simon and Jude. According to the ancient story, Mar Adai, St. Jude Thaddeus, is the one who evangelized the Assyrians. And according to this tradition, he ordained, the ancient accounts is Mari, which is St. Mari. And of course, another Assyrian who's created a lot of attention for himself is Mari Emmanuel. But he's named after the two big founders of the Assyrian Church of the East, St. Jude Thaddeus, or Mar Adai, and Mari. And both were considered disciples of Jesus Christ, and so is Abdias. And it seems like the city of Babylon he was ordained over the city of Babylon as its bishop, or was left the city of Babylon at the time. It's kind of a city in decline. But he's considered the person who took the stories of the 12 apostles and wrote this account. That's the legend. And scholars dispute that and think that this collection came together much after the time of Abdias of Babylon, which is Saint Obadiah of Babylon. But the stories do have an ancient pedigree, including the story of Abdias himself. So that book is out there. I just want to mention that. I want to put a shout out to Liz, to her work, and to these. This is important, right? To maintain the culture, to keep the culture together, to study the historical legacy of the Assyrian Christian people. So, and Liz has done a lot of great work on that. So I want to put that out. And I want to mention in this program, I want to show a couple of graphics. One is it's called the Assyrian Church of the East, or sometimes the East Syriac Church. And it was also called the Nestorian Church, even though that is a bit of a misnomer. And I recently saw this a photograph, and I want to do more about this in later programs. The Ancient Assyrian Church of the East. And of course, in the East is where it started, founded by Thomas, Thaddeus, Mari, and Abdias as well, and others. But this church, even in late antiquity, they were already taking the gospel. The story is that Thomas himself took the gospel to India, and there's a thriving community of Syriac Christians in India. I've visited those places. I've also retraced the steps of Thomas in India. We also have Assyrian Christians bringing the gospel to Central Asia and even to China itself. And for centuries, there's a Chinese Assyrian Christian community, a Syriac and Aramaic Christian community that probably died out because of jihadism and the Black Plague. These two forces worked against them. And the sources seem to indicate that Catholics came into China and converted Assyrian Christians to Roman Catholicism. So there's a possibility that the family lines of Chinese Christians today might not be recent converts. They could go back potentially over 1,000 years. So another thing I want to talk about is, there's two important Assyrian communities I want to mention. Now, I've been to Iraq for the war. Actually, I've been to Iraq for the war twice. I served in combat in Iraq. But you really have two Assyrian communities. And the Assyrian community of Iraq, and I visited the Assyrian Christian homeland in Syria, and then Iraq. I went to Iraq twice for the war in uniform, the first time carrying a weapon, the second time as a chaplain. I'm very patriotic, so we have this, wear my patriotic symbol here. But you also have you have Iran, which is Persia. Now, in the last episode, I was talking about, or in a previous episode, I was talking about language families, and I mentioned the Indo-European languages, which used to be called the Aryan languages until Adolf Hitler gave this word, which really didn't have a negative connotation. He gave it a bad connotation, associations that aren't accurate, but nonetheless, when people think of this word, they think of the negative connotations. But Aryan, the Iranian people, are trying to say we are part of the Indo-European people. But the biblical name for this land is Persia. And probably what happens, I imagine that if the mullahs ever fall, Iran's probably going to have its name changed to Persia to disassociate itself from generations of tyranny. So in Iraq, you have basically it's an Arab country. In the north, there's a lot of Kurdish people. So when I was in Iraq, we actually had a lot of Assyrian Christian translators, because usually Assyrians from over there are fluent in Aramaic, their first language, but they also know Kurdish and Arabic, so they make ideal translators. But this is an Arabic-speaking country. A lot of sometimes the Assyrian homeland is called Kurdistan. And the Kurdish language is related to Farsi, or the Persian language. And anyway, I loved Iraq. I love Iraq. It's a great nation. I'm sorry for all the problems it's endured. Iran too. I haven't been to Iran yet. It's unlikely I'm going to go as long as the mullahs are in power. But these are the two. You got Assyrians from Iraq and Assyrians from Iran. Um, some of the Iranian Assyrians imagine themselves as more sophisticated and educated than the Iraqi Assyrians. The Iraqi Assyrians resent that, but it's one community, and we shouldn't allow ourselves to be divided by petty things like that. But both of these nations have contributed, people who are very important for the international Assyrian community. Here in the United States, we have a big Assyrian community in Central California, now in Arizona, and Chicago. But there's a large Assyrian community also in Australia now as well. So what I want to talk about is, I've been out of action for a long time. I visited the Assyrian Christian community in the Middle East in 2001, almost 25 years ago now. And I've been, wrote my book, The Words of Jesus in the Original Aramaic. I'm trying to educate Christians about the importance of Aramaic and the Aramaic Christian heritage. But in the past few years, a lot of tragedies and misfortunes have struck me, but now I think I'm trying to get back in the fray, and we're going to have Dr. Missick back in action. So I had a lot of deaths of loved ones. Penny died, my dad died around the same time, rapid succession. But we'll see what happens now. I think things we're about to turn over a new leaf. But I want to mention something in conclusion of this lesson, this little program. And I was looking at some responses to this YouTube channel is picking up. I built a large YouTube channel. I had 5,000 plus subscribers. I was going to 6,000 subscribers. So wasn't really a big name, but it's a moderately successful YouTube channel. And but since I'm conservative, a traditionalist, and Trump supporter, YouTube is targeting me, and I was deplatformed, totally deplatformed, and canceled over nothing. They violated their policies, but that was a systematic campaign from the prior political administration. And actually, they were doing that before Biden took office. So that's why a lot of conservatives think there's a deep state, a left-wing, entrenched deep bureaucracy who, it kind of disturbs me. It's like, when we need continuity, it doesn't matter what party, we need the Constitution, right? That's the continuity we need. Not you guys, not people in government pushing a Marxist socialist agenda against the will of the people. That's not something we need. We need transparencies. We need accountability. We need these people to realize that they're not our overlords. They work for us. And all these people are doing all this unconstitutional activity, like, violating my constitutional rights. They belong in prison. And I hope that it's like people don't have the stomach for that, but it's necessary to push back sometime, so we can have dialogue, debate, and the free exchange of ideas. That's our constitutional system, and it's under attack. So anyway, it got to a point. It's like, what am I going to do? How can once my channel gets traction, YouTube's this might happen again. YouTube's going to cancel me again. Once I start getting exposure, they're going to start shadow banning me. I don't know. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But I'm going to try again. I'm not going to let. The thing is, you just don't. They want you to surrender. These forces they're satanic. These demonic forces of. I don't understand the appeal of totalitarianism, or of Marxism, and they try to cast aspersion on Christianity, and it's like, over 100 million people died because of communism in the 20th century and into the 21st century. It's one of the most discredited systems ever, an evil system ever devised by man, and yet we have people in our own government who's trying to push these far left totalitarian ideas. I think we have a moral obligation to oppose it, but one of the things I need to do is okay, don't give up. So they censor you, so they cancel you, so you're deplatformed. Just get back up and keep on fighting against these people. And maybe this time they're not going to be able. I'll get so big they won't be able to do that. I don't really want to get that big. I just want to do what's wrong with me having, a moderately successful YouTube channel? And who are these people to decide I mean, if people want to watch my videos and support my content, it's no business of the YouTube governing board or Google or the FBI, whoever's orchestrating the censorship. But anyway, back to what I talk about. I'm going on too long. This is meant to be a short program. So I think it's important for us to oppose radical Islam. I'm going to do it. And, that might be one of the reasons why I don't like me speaking. Sam Shamoun does it. Sam Shamoun, sometimes he seems too rude and aggressive, but sometimes I think he's speaking back and talking to people at the tone that they need. I'm not saying he always does it. Sometimes he does it. Maybe he does make mistakes and acts inappropriately. But sometimes we need to be forceful and aggressive against these people. Now, in the opening credits of this show, you know what you're looking at? You're looking at pictures that I took at the Kabur River Valley in Syria. After Iraq became an independent nation, in August of, I should know these dates, but the Iraqi government, they carried out a massacre of Assyrians. And actually the people who carried it out were given, commendations, shamefully. But it was a massacre, it was a mini genocidal thing. I think hundreds of people died. But the Assyrian people had no place to go, some of them. And you had the French mandate in Syria, and they allowed Assyrians to come to the Kabul River Valley and establish 30 villages. And I wrote for the Journal of Assyrian Academic Studies. And before I wrote, I was reading their articles, and they had articles about the Assyrian communities in Hasaki, Syria. And when I graduated from college with my bachelor's degree, I went to Syria to visit these communities. I said, wouldn't that be really neat to go to the Middle East to visit Aramaic-speaking Christians in their homeland in the Middle East? I went to Malula in Syria, where they speak Western Neo-Aramaic, and then I visited the Assyrian community in Hasaki. I met the bishop, Mar Afram Othniel, and I went there twice. So I really enjoyed my stay over in that area. The people are very friendly and nice to me, and there's like a lot of farming communities, little towns. It was nice. I enjoyed that. And I went twice. So ISIS goes over there. So fight in Iraq, I'm permanently disabled from injuries sustained in war. And I endured a lot of hardships in Iraq. And the war was mismanaged, but in the end, we won the war, if that's what you want to call it. And then we had a withdrawal, just like Afghanistan, an unnecessary withdrawal. I don't want all of our troops there forever, but we need to have a small contingent of soldiers there, a small permanent presence to maintain our gains. But Obama pulled all troops out of Iraq, and what happened? It created a power vacuum. ISIS went in there, trying to create a new caliphate, and you had ethnic cleansing, and they went in to these communities. There's probably 90% of the people at the Kabur River Valley, all the Christians, are gone now. And they lined people up and killed them. I think the ISIS people are just demonically possessed, because the things that they're doing to children, to human beings, it's like normal human beings can't imagine doing. And they also did it to Yazidis. They also did it to moderate Muslims. But it takes a big toll when you're looking at a minority like the Assyrian Christians to carry out targeted killings like that, and the ethnic cleansing. And when that happened, I want to mention something else. This is not a new phenomenon. I'm going to be publishing my doctorate soon. And part of my doctorate, I put a timeline. Every 50 to 100 years, Muslims, doesn't matter which kind of Muslims they were, Arabs, Turks, whatever, every 50 to 100 years since Islam arrived in the ancient Assyrian homeland, they've carried out what would you call a pogrom or genocidal attacks against the Assyrians. And I did a timeline of it for my doctoral program. It's the same true as Egypt. Even Ethiopia has been attacked. And I remember I got these. There's a book by an Assyrian Christian, it's over 100 years old now, This Flickering Light of Asia by Joel Awarda. I think he's a Protestant pastor. And he was talking about the atrocities committed by Kurds and Turks and Arabs against Assyrian Christians. And you read these stories. Here's what I'm reading these stories, and I'm thinking, is this for real? Is this true? We're talking about blood, the ground covered with blood splashed on the walls, taking Christian children and raping them and killing them on the altar on top of an open Bible. And it's like, is this an exaggeration? Did this really happen as it's written in these accounts? It is so horrific, and not just the Assyrians, but I have these books I wrote. Passage to I read a book called Passage to Ararat. I got other books about the Armenian genocide, and the Turkish genocide against the Assyrians, and the Turkish genocide. Well, they went after the Assyrians, the Armenians, and the Greeks. And I'm reading these accounts, and it's hard to believe. It's like, well, maybe they exaggerated this. I'm sure that something terrible happened, and there were some killings, but the scale of it and just the brutality of the actions, it's just like, honestly, I was doubting it. How could people do things like this? It's just the atrocities are so horrific and appalling. So even though it's like, I'm not, it's just hard to believe that this really happened. So then, 100 years later, 2000, you had 1915, this genocide where they killed 1 million Assyrians, Greeks, and Armenians. And then 100 years later, they do it again. The pattern I was saying, that I wrote about my doctoral project. Every 50 to 100 years, you have these genocides like this. And when they went after the Assyrian villages that I visited, that I lived in, I decided I had enough. I've had enough of radical Islam. I'm done with it. I don't care how offended they are. It's time for mankind to say to these people, we're done with you. And there's something else, another phenomenon going on. Right now, 1 in 5 Muslims, especially in Western countries, 1 in 5 Muslims are leaving Islam. I think humankind should have had enough by now, but I think God Almighty's had enough. These people are ripe for judgment, and I believe this big edifice of Islam, God's going to judge it, and it's going to fall. And I thank God. Thank you, Jesus, that it looks like I'm going to be able to see this in my lifetime. I've had enough of this. And here's something else that happened I think that we need to pay attention to. Now, Biden, or whoever's controlling him, gave the Iranian mullahs trillions of dollars for no real reason. It's just all of a sudden it's on the news. Obama has agreed to give gazillion dollars to the Iranian regime. It's like, why in God's name would you? We want the people to be liberated from the mullahs. We want the theocracy to end. And those people, the mullahs, are actually hurting Islam because the people, they've done polls, and they're forced to obey these rules because you got the religious, the mukhabarat, the religious, it was the Society for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice, the religious police. They have the religious police in Saudi Arabia. So what happens? They're all over the place. They're plainclothes religious cops. So just say in Saudi Arabia, it's Ramadan. I don't believe in smoking, but just say, for instance, you're out and about in Ramadan, you light up a cigarette. Suddenly, 20 men with bats are going to start, running towards you and beating you with the bats. That's the religious police. Or if you're a woman and you adjust your hijab wrong and too much of your face shows, all of a sudden, if you're in public, all of a sudden 20 men with bats are going to run up to you and start wailing on you with these bats. That's the religious police. So what happens is they can do stuff like that in Iran and in Saudi Arabia. But what's happening is they've done these polls, and a lot of Iranians are converting to Christianity, or they're saying they're agnostic or secular, or actually a lot of them are claiming to return to the ancient Persian religion, Zoroastrianism. On these anonymous polls, Islam is losing grip over Iran. So I think that's a good thing. But what happens is Biden, or we know that Biden wasn't making these decisions. Obama or whoever else is behind Biden, gave all this money to Iran. What happened immediately? There was in al-Baghdadi, Iraq, in a Syrian Christian village, there's a wedding party, and the Iranians, it had to be them, put a bomb and they blew up a wedding party, and dozens of people were killed. Had a hall rented out, they're doing a marriage, and the Iranians planted bombs in there, and they massacred Assyrians. Then right after that, Nagorno-Karabakh, the Armenian and Assyrian community, This is Assyrian and Armenian land, and the international community allowed the Turks of Azerbaijan to continue the work they began 100 years earlier in the Armenian genocide and totally depopulate that region of all Assyrians and Armenians. Then you had October 7th. So these three events in rapid succession. Obama Biden financed these three atrocities, and we've been suffering. Think about, because sadly people don't care about Armenians and Assyrians, but they care about Israel for whatever reason. And now we have this problem, but I don't think Iran would have been able to carry out those three attacks, which they were all Iranians, if Biden hadn't given them the finances to do that. So I'm done with the violence. I'm done with it. And it's time for us to speak truth about Islam and their history. This has been going on for 1,400 years. I got this graphic I want to show you, and I really want to recommend the work of Raymond Ibrahim. He's written several books. This is Raymond Ibrahim. The first book he wrote that I read was about the Morsi. He's a Coptic Christian. It's about the Morsi government in Egypt. And this book was called Crucified Again. But this isn't a recent, like I mentioned, this is not just a recent phenomenon. This has been going on for 1,400 years. And we need to talk about it. And we just need to say enough. I mean, God is already judging these people. And we need to be on the right side of history. Stop making apologies or justifications for these people. I've had enough. I lived in those Assyrian Christian villages, and for these people just to depopulate them, I'm done. I'm done with it. And now we know, like I said, I was reading those accounts about, by Joel Warda and others, and it's like, how could this be true? How could people do such horrific things? It's hard for me to believe it. But then you see, they're proud of it. They film themselves committing these atrocities, and they take pictures, they'd upload it to YouTube so the whole world could see about it. And like I said, this is totally satanic. These people are demon-possessed. Why justify? It says in the Bible, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. It's like, oh, you need to be softer on Islam. No, I've had it. I've had it with them. And God's had it with them, and he's judging them already. And I appreciate what Raymond Ibrahim's done. He's also written some books on the history called Sword and Scimitar. He's got a new book coming out. And God bless him, These are the things I've been wanting to do and trying to do. Now, he's doing it, and he's being successful at it. And like I said, maybe I'm getting back in the frame, starting to fight again too, for Christ. And these things are all related. I've done videos in Christian apologetics. When we're doing apologetics, we have to confront the challenge of Islam as well. And these Muslim people, you just go to Speaker's Corner. You got people like Muhammad Hijab and Ali Dawa and others. They stand at Speaker's Corner in London and they blaspheme Jesus Christ. They insult the holy apostles and engage in sacrilege. And, Christians are going to, we want to be nice. It's time. It's not nice to allow Christ to be blasphemed. You need to speak up and say, no, you're wrong. Don't deny the Lord. If you're not willing to speak up against, be a defender of the faith. Don't let these people lie and blaspheme Jesus Christ. They question the authority and the sanctity of the Bible. No, we need to answer them. And in the end, it's the loving thing. When I look at Sharia law, I love people. I don't want to see people suffering under that system. It really offends me. I've lived in the Middle East. I've seen it. How women are treated in these countries. It's offensive. I understand traditional gender roles, and I believe in some of that, honestly. But these women are human beings, and they're treated worse than animals. And it's beyond human decency. It's evil. And we have a moral obligation to speak against it. So, yes, once they did, I used to think it's like, you got to be politic and polite. But after ISIS, that's it. What is it going to take? What is it going to take? Actually, September 11th should have been enough. I guess it's not. But, I really believe that God's judging. He's already judging these people. And we need to stand with God. We need to stand with the Scripture, stand with the apostles against evil. And what these people do, these radical Muslims, is evil. It's anti-human, it's anti-God, it's anti-Christ. And we have a moral obligation to speak against it. And if you're offended by that, I think that's your problem. My problem is they wouldn't leave the Assyrian people alone. They went too far, and I'm done with it. And I'm glad to see their wicked belief system collapsing. As it is. That's what the polls show. So thank God for that. So join us for the next program. I do want to show this graphic about, in an earlier program, I was talking about how jihad, you look at jihad, this is actually one war. It's the longest war fought on earth. You know, you have like World War I, World War II, the Civil War, you know, the 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, but we have a 1,400-year war. Because in the year 622, Muhammad, and we don't even know how historical this is, a lot of the hadiths are mythological and legendary, but their story is that Muhammad leaves Mecca, goes to Medina, and he starts a war of global conquest. They had to defeat the Arab people. When Muhammad died, this is a fact of history, he had the Ridda Wars, because the Arab people, they saw Islam as not part of their culture. They thought it was anti-Arab, and the Arab people didn't want to have anything to do with Islam. After Muhammad died, it's like they're like, "Whew, thank God this guy's gone. We can go back to human decency." But the Muslims, unfortunately, they had to regroup, and they conquered the Arabs, and then they began conquering the whole world. This is a war of Islamic imperialism, and I want to look at this video. So, in the year 622 until today, this is one war of global conquest. This is the longest, like I mentioned, the 30-year war. They had the 100 Years' War. This is the 1,400-year war of conquest, of Islamic global conquest. That's a fact of history. I wish people would understand that. And if you want to know Islam, years ago I read the Quran, and it's not an easy read. He rambles on incoherently. The book has a very bad structure. It's incoherent. It's not definitely not a masterpiece. I've read the Mahabharatas, the Upanishads, the Analects of Confucius, a lot of sacred texts that I enjoyed. The Quran is a very difficult read. It's not well written. It's just the ramblings of an uneducated person, and it comes through. So it's hard to read the Quran, honestly. It's hard to read it. But Bill Warner, he did a translation of the Quran called A Simple Quran. And what he did, if you want to read the Quran, which unfortunately some people need to read the Quran, if you're engaged in apologetics, you want to understand the Islamic world, he did a version of the Quran called A Simple Quran. He also did one a condensed version, because there's it's repetitive. Like, I think it tells the story of Moses, the Exodus, like 39 times. So he condensed it. It's still repetitive. You know, he probably took out 25% of it, maybe a little bit more, maybe a third, but it's still redundant, repetitive. But Bill Warner's, if you want, you can actually read a readable Quran. I'd recommend that. But he's done a series of videos about the global Islamic conquest, and it's time for us to engage this. And unfortunately, to this day, you know, the Assyrian people have been victims of jihadism, the global Islamic global war of conquest over the earth. And that's an important thing. If you're going to study the history of the Assyrian people, you know, they're reduced to being a dhimmi, right? D-H-I-M-I, a dhimmi, which is a subjugated person. You're not really even a second-class citizen. You're a conquered person. Now, the dhimmi used to have to pay a tax, right? What's the rate? So it's like, okay, you're a people of the book. You pay us money, and we'll allow you to practice your religion. But you can't build any new churches. You can't, we don't want you can't have loud services. If you go to the Middle East, a lot of churches have lower entrances. And part of that was to keep Muslims from riding their horses in the middle of the service and, with a sword and chopping people's head off and taking women out, virgin girls out to rape. That's the life of Assyrian Christians. I hate to say it. That's what they're subjected to. That's history. I mean, I didn't commit these acts, the Muslims did. It's a fact of history. That's what they did. I've been to these churches. It's like, oh, why does this church have a low? Oh, that's to keep the Muslims from riding in, we're having Holy Qurbana, the Mass, and they come in here and, at the store start waving around and grab a girl to rape. And, could you imagine having to endure and be subjected to that? And then they don't want you to talk about what they did. But how much is the rate that the Christians had to pay? Raymond Ibrahim's doing some videos about this. There is no fixed rate. The money could be 100% everything you had. It is at a whim. 1%, 10%, 15%, 100%. And like I said, every 150 years, they would go in there, or 1,500 years, they go in there and just start killing Christians. And that's why that's why Egypt's now, half of all Iraqi Christians have left since the International War on Terror began. And what was the big factor of them leaving? ISIS. Someone called this the process of conversion, which I find a very offensive way to put it. But that's how they did it. That's why Egypt is 15% Christian now, which used to be the center of Christianity, because long sustained persecution has led to the extinction of certain Christian communities. Tertullian of Carthage, a brilliant church father, in Tunisia and Algeria, there's hardly any Christians there now, because if you do this for 1,400 years, and the danger is, it's like, these Christians, it's like, I don't believe in Islam, but I can't live like this. I'm going to have to convert, but I'll secretly maintain my faith in Christ. But, what happens is their son or grandson becomes jihadis once you make that decision. We all have suffered for that. And what shall a man exchange for a soul? You inherit the world and lose your soul. It's not sell out. But see, that's the thing. I went to international fight in the International War on Terror. And, sometimes military force is necessary. But why can't we just tell the truth, for crying out loud? Just be bold enough and tell the truth. I've been shot at. Go to war and carrying that weapon, I'm permanently physically disabled. I'm always in pain. And yet we have people that they're afraid to look at the truth, to read about the truth, to acknowledge the truth, and speak the truth. Cowardice. In the book of Revelation, there's a lot of sins out there that everybody's going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And people think that cowardice is, it's a minor sin, but it's something God hates. And it's interesting that it talks about people being thrown into the lake of fire and eternal damnation. And it says, who's in there? Murderers and killers of parents. It says, cowards. Cowards. So we need to have the courage to speak out and set the record straight. So that's what I'm going to do. I don't care what, you got to think about the end goal, right? The end goal is advancing the kingdom of God and saving, protecting humankind. That's what I'm going to do. And this is imperative. This is imperative. This is what we need to do. Stop making excuses and apologizing for the enemies of God and mankind. Expose them for their evil. Hold them accountable for it. Because we have to end it. And we have to end this forever. I want this 1,400-year war to be over and not a threat to the survival of mankind again. And we're going to have to defeat radical Islam. And that's, a lot of reasons why they use violence, because they scare people, because they want to scare people, because they realize that they cannot stand up to criticism. Once you have people engaging their ideas and speaking out freely, they will be defeated. They will be defeated, and nothing could be better in the history of the world for this satanic, that's what it is. They deny the cross of Christ. They are enemies of the cross of Christ. Where do you stand? Jesus said, I'm going to end with this, two things. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So we need to speak the truth. Jesus also said, if I, the Son of Man, be lifted up on the cross, I will draw all men unto me. We need to lift up the cross of Christ. These people are enemies of the cross of Christ. I remember just before I joined the military, General H. Norman Schwarzkopf, he told our chaplains, take off the cross from your uniforms. We don't want to offend people. Well, let them be offended. We should not take off the cross, take down the cross. Why are they offended by the cross? Because the power of God unto salvation to all people, Jew, Gentile, Arab, everyone. And Satan hates it. And whose side are you on? I'm on the side of Jesus Christ. I'm going to lift up the cross. And if you have a problem with that, that's your problem. And you're going to face God one day. And you need to make a decision who you're going to stand with. Christ, are you going to lift up the cross, or are you going to stand with the enemies of the cross? So that's my position, and we need to get more voices to join together and speak truth to this evil satanic power, which God is joining. So let God be true, and I'm going to affirm his truth, and every man that speaks against him, they are liars, and they will be defeated. So, sorry to go on a little bit too long. Check out my book. I want to mention in conclusion that I have a study guide that's going along with this. I don't have a copy right now. I'm revising it. The edition that's out right now has some typos in it, and I'm making some improvements to it. Plus, it was printed the wrong size. It's supposed to be just like this, the same size. So it's like an inch shorter, and it's being revised. So it's going to be a revised edition. So this one's the Further Acts of the Apostles, according to Abdius of Babylon. The other one's called the Lives of the 12 Apostles, according to Abdius of Babylon Study Guide. So hopefully you can support my work by getting these books, and also check out what they're doing here, and listen to Liz. She wrote an article right here. Yeah. Elizabeth McKaylee Huber, I call her Liz. And then my article right here about Abdius of Babylon, part of the Syrian Christian heritage. So see you next time. Got a extra episode here, so I'll continue part 3. We'll continue next episode with the introduction to Aramaic studies.
Whenever you're dealing with an apologist for Islam, or even a Muslim, and you bring up jihad, almost immediately they kick back to you. Well, what about those terrible crusades? Why, they're the moral justification for jihad. I mean, we're just as bad as they are, so let's not talk about jihad, okay? Let's talk about the crusades. Well, what I would like to talk about here are facts. And it turns out I sat down and put together some work, and I created a database of some 548 battles that Islam fought, jihad battles against classical civilization. And this aren't even all the battles. It really doesn't say much about Africa and India, Afghanistan and all that. It's primarily the battles against the classical civilization of Rome and Greece. So, 548 battles is a lot, and it's too much to even comprehend. So I created something which I call a dynamic battle map, in which you have a display of the Mediterranean, and a white dot means that this 20-year period, that's a new battle. So every time the screen changes, it's 20-year period. The colors white turn to red, so you can see a history. This may seem a little confusing, but I think when you see it, you'll know exactly what I mean. And here it starts. Islam burst out of the Arabian Peninsula and immediately starts attacking the Middle East. And notice that it doesn't take long until they're crossing the Mediterranean and attacking southern France and Spain. Notice something here. Most people think of Islam, they think of Arabs. They think of Arabs, they think of desert. And yet here we see that Islam is projecting power throughout the Mediterranean. Notice how the little islands of the Mediterranean are getting hammered. The navy of Islam would attack coastal towns, kill, rob, rape, and then take slaves. So this whole battle map, as it unfolds, you're seeing slaves being taken. Over 1 million slaves were taken out of Europe into the Islamic world. That's something you don't think about much, but it's absolutely true. There were over 200 battles fought in Spain alone. And we also see, however, on the east coast in Turkey, that Islam is trying to break into Europe. Now, what's going to happen is, in Spain, this ongoing fight that lasted for 400 years, the Christians are going to push back the Muslims. But now then what has happened over in the east is that Constantinople has fallen, and now then Eastern Europe is getting hammered. The jihad now comes to Eastern Europe. It's pushed out now of Spain. Northern Africa is now completely Islamic. The Middle East is completely Islamic. This is all jihad, relentless jihad. And why is it so relentless? Well, Muhammad was relentless in his jihad. And these people are good students of Islam, and so it's against the kafir, on and on. It was traditional that when the Sultan came to power, the brand new Sultan, he would immediately try to launch new wars because he was going to be noted in his Islamic history as to how well he fought against the kafir. So that's what the jihad looked like over that time period, 548 battles. But remember, when you bring up jihad, people want to bring up the Crusades. So I also prepared a dynamic battle map of all the offensive raids of the Crusaders. Let's watch it and make a comparison. And so it begins. The Crusades enter into Turkey and the Middle East. Battles go on, but aren't there far fewer than you thought there might be? And here we go. The last battles are fought, and that is the end of the Crusades. So now then we can talk about some facts. Yes, there were Crusades, but notice they ended centuries ago, and jihad is being practiced today. Jihad has been with us for 1,400 years. There is no comparison between jihad and the Crusades, certainly not a moral comparison. And when you're looking at the Crusades, remember, in one sense, all of the Crusades were defensive wars. Why? Well, as we saw on the first jihad map, it was Islam that came out of Arabia and conquered the Middle East, a Christian Middle East. And so the Crusaders were trying to free their Christian brothers and sisters from jihad. So there's no moral comparison at all. The motivation of the Crusaders was to free Christians. The purpose of jihad is to enslave the kafir. So the next time you hear somebody talk about, oh, those dreadful Crusades, you've seen some facts about the matter. Why don't you pipe up and tell them you know, you don't really know the matter.
Research, rescue, and restore. Help Voice of the Word and Aramaic Christian Ministries mission research the ancient languages, peoples, lands, cultures, and times of the Bible. Rescue persecuted Assyrian Christians in the Middle East and restore Christianity to its original Semitic roots. For Stephen Missick's books, online giving, and other resources from Aramaic Christian Ministries, visit www.stephenmissick.com. Join us next time on Voice of the Word as we research the Scriptures, rescue persecuted Christians, and restore the Church to its Semitic roots.